Salam world! I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and today we're going to be talking about the Prince of Egypt. In all honesty, I haven't seen this movie since I was a child, but the OST is peak. So I had high hopes going in, and well... Now, to be fair, the production is incredible. The animation, the soundtrack, and some of the character arcs, they're very compelling, and you do feel for some of the characters. I won't lie, I could have shed a tear or two when I saw the cruelty that was happening to the Hebrews. But it's the compelling nature of the art of film and media which makes it dangerous. The movie does make it clear that the story is inspired by the events depicted in Exodus and that artistic and historical liberties have been taken, meaning that they're explicitly saying that this is a piece of fiction and not meant to be a historical piece meant to teach, kids about the story of Moses. But still, they are depicting God and characters that are sacred in three of the world's largest religions, as well as using non-fictional sources, or at least primary sources, right? So, like any novel and its movie adaptation, we are allowed to compare them and criticize the adaptation if it changes much to the story, which it does. And so that's what we'll be doing today, looking at the difference between the source material and the movie. If you're only here for the movie review, please click on the timestamp on the screen right now or go into the descriptions and click on the link there, whichever suits you best. And now, let's talk stories. Now, this film is about a boy with a great destiny to save his world. And to save him from the evil forces who want to get rid of him before he is born, pretty much, he's sent to live with someone and somewhere that don't know of his destiny. And then one day he meets someone who does tell him what his destiny is meant to be, and he's like totally shook about it. And then he travels somewhere away from his childhood home where he meets an old wise man who teaches him the meaning of life and other types of philosophies in the world and comes in terms with his destiny. He then unlocks some super strong ability, confronts the bad guy, and uses a magical stick to defeat him, and so fulfills his destiny. And surprisingly enough, the main character doesn't have a scar or blue eyes. He's a Hebrew. What I'm trying to say is this film, it has the plot of a generic hero story. And hero stories are great. I mean, look at Harry Potter and Star Wars. They are amazing. And The Prince of Egypt could have passed for one of these classical hero origin stories if it weren't for the fact that it was based on non-fictional material and the execution wasn't as good. Now, as a Muslim, I grew up learning the story of Moses given in the Holy Quran. But given that the movie claims that it's an adaptation of the biblical account, I decided to go back to the source material. Now, this is a New King James Bible, and I don't know if the story of Exodus is different in different variations of the Bible. So I'm sure that our Christian brothers and sisters will let me know in the comments. But based on this, I can say that it's unlike the movie. The Bible starts by giving us some context to the story of Moses. It starts by saying, "Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob." It then continues to describe those who came with Jacob until in verse 8 it says, "Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph." Now, this is super important. Instead of starting out with a musical number, which leaves the audience wondering how God would have ever let this awful thing happen to his people, we understand that the people of Israel migrated to Egypt of their own will, and they were welcomed there by the king of Egypt. And they remained there and established themselves until generations later, the Amarna period in Egypt ends as a common-born general assumes the throne and destroys all evidence of the previous period, including the evidence of monotheism. The pharaohs of the 19th dynasty saw the Armenian kings as weak, particularly Akhenaten, who changed the religion of Egypt and became monotheist. Changes in government because of this meant that Egypt lost a lot of territory, but they also opened their doors to the children of Israel, who were the relatives of the vizier of Egypt at the time, Joseph. So when Uncle I assumes the throne, who is the brother of Sayyidati, which is the mother of Akhenaten, before the change in religion, he puts the groundworks to kind of return Egypt to its prior glory before the monotheistic religion and changed it back to polytheism. The new dynasty fast-tracked this goal of returning Egypt back to its finer glory on the backs of Hebrew slaves, according to religious texts, which makes sense to me. I mean, at the time, the people of Egypt were still monotheistic, and they haven't changed back to the old ways just yet. And so to convince the people of Egypt that they are indeed God instead of this monotheistic God that they were worshipping, well, they'll have to scare them. And who better to use as a scare tactic than the people that they claim are responsible for the changes in Egypt, the children of Israel? In the movie, the Hebrews are already enslaved long before Ramses II took the throne. If we look at the number of years between the rule of Uncle I and Ramses, we only find a total of 3 kings in between, which is a sum of 41 years. It's unclear when the enslavement of the Hebrews occurred archaeologically, or which pharaoh was the one referred to in the Bible, or honestly the Quran as well. The Egyptians had slaves of numerous different races, so it's difficult for us to pinpoint which were the Hebrews to figure out where in time the Hebrews were enslaved. So there isn't a complete consensus on when these events took place. However, for years, the prominent theory has been that the pharaoh in the scriptures is Ramses II, and so for now, we'll just roll with it. So based on that, it would only give us 41 years of enslavement. That would only mean a single generation of Hebrews between the original and the current slaves, which means that God wanted to save them as soon as their fate came about. There's no lag time in God's response, which would have made the Hebrews lose hope. Of course, the living Hebrews couldn't save themselves from slavery because they're the ones enslaved and oppressed, and the process of new Hebrews coming to save them was made significantly harder by the fact that the Pharaoh was killing every born male every second year. But by God's mercy, a mother whose pregnancy didn't show at all was inspired to hide her child in a casket and put him in the Nile. At 3 months old, the river brings the casket to the royal household where it's picked up by the pharaoh's wife. In the Bible, Moses is picked up by the daughter of the pharaoh rather than his wife. But in Islam, Musa alayhi salam was picked up by the pharaoh's wife, but not the same one shown in the movie. So in Islam, the wife of the pharaoh that picks up Moses has no children and can't bear children for the pharaoh, and that's why he lets her keep Moses. Whereas in the movie, we see that the wife of the pharaoh is the same wife that is the mother of Ramses. What this would mean that in the movie, both Ramses and Moses were raised by the same woman, whereas in Islam, They're raised by two different women. Another difference between the movie and the two Holy Scriptures is that Moses didn't know that he was a Hebrew and genuinely believes himself to be the son of the Pharaoh, while in the Bible and the Quran, Musa alayhi salam refuses to drink milk from any woman until Moses' sister Maryam leads the Pharaoh's wife to their mother again. And so the Pharaoh's wife or daughter hires Moses' mother to look after him until he's old enough to live in the palace with her. And nowhere else does it say that he forgets his mother or who he really is. In fact, the next verse in the Bible says, "Now it came to pass in those days when Moses was grown, that he went out to his brethren and looked at their burdens, and he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his brethren." So Moses knew that he was Hebrew, not Egyptian. So Musa alayhi salam grew up with a strong sense of justice. So when he was observing an act of injustice happening to a Hebrew and the oppressed Hebrew calls out to him for help, Musa alayhi salam comes to his aid and defends him, which results in the death of the Egyptian. The film and the Quran make it clear that the death was accidental. Unlike the movie, where the incident took place in front of an audience, both the Bible and the Quran say that Moses believed that there were no witnesses. So there weren't many people around, and there are two different reasons for that in each of the scriptures. But when that same man had a confrontation another time, he asks Musa alayhi salam to do what he had done to the Egyptian again. And this got the attention of the authorities, and so Musa alayhi salam had a target on his back, pretty much. An additional detail, which is found in the Quran, is that when the authorities were trying to capture him, one of the people in the Pharaoh's palace, who's a friend to Moses, used a shortcut to try and reach Moses before the authorities, and he is the one who told him what's happening and advised him to save himself. And so Musa alayhi salam makes it out of the clutches of the Pharaoh and travels to the land of Madian. This land is located between modern-day Syria and Saudi Arabia, but it's most likely more on the southern side of that range. There, he sees some shepherds refusing for girls to let their livestock have some water, so Musa alayhi salam interferes and helps the girls out. When the girls tell their father that a good man has helped them, he offers this man his thanks and shows his gratitude by offering him a livelihood for 10 years. I mean, this is huge. He offers him 10 years worth of food, water, shelter, and a job. Now, I won't be using a name for this good man who's the father of these girls, just as the Quran does. And the reason for that is that in the Bible there are two different names, one of which is Ruel and the other Jethro. I tried to look into it, but there are quite a few differing opinions whether Ruel and Jethro are the same person or not. There are also different names and identities ascribed to this good man, and it's a subject of scholarly debate till today. And so, for the sake of uniting all accounts, we will refer to him as the good man, for the man that he truly was. In the movie, they do use the name Jethro in reference to this good man. And then cue my favorite part of the movie. Through Heaven's Eyes is just one of my favorite songs in this entire soundtrack. It summarizes that the value of a human comes through his service and actions, which he does for the sake of God. Each person is born with potential for good and to be worthy, but life can make us forget our worth or overstate it. At the end of the day, nothing that you collect, build, or own is worth anything except for your personality and your character, the way that you act towards others, and what you love. These are the things that give rise to who you are and who you can become. Although the song is meant to mirror the growth of Moses from the confused prince that he was to the man of great power and faith, it falls short. Because throughout the entire montage, we don't actually see Moses change. He stays the same prankster, laid back flirt that he was all the way back in Egypt. And it's this lack of self development and his jarring character shifts throughout this movie, which makes it an unconvincing hero story at the end of the day, and just an insult to history. As an audience, we're not convinced at this point that Moses is a good candidate for divine power. As far as the story goes, we don't see Moses have any faith or hope. All of his actions so far have come from a place of fear and confusion inside of him. And this is like a stark contrast to the character of Miriam in this film. By this standard, she's a far better candidate for being the divine vessel. I mean, she's positive, influential, hopeful, selfless, caring, and fearless. But most importantly, she's faithful. For a believer in the prophethood of Moses, this is character assassination 101. Destroy the infallibility of Moses' prophethood by making him an unagreeable character and with many character flaws. Disrespect his status by making him the butt of different jokes. Show his weakness as a character by making him buckle down to authority and go against his own principles. And for any general hero arc, you require reformation and transformation. But Moses just skips the reformation altogether and goes straight to transformation. And I have my suspicions that the writers knew about this, and so to counter it, you need to introduce a character which is worse than Moses, so that at the end of the day you end up rooting for him. And with a heavy heart, I have to say that this character was God. God is portrayed as this vengeful tyrant, scaring Moses to complete submission and controlling his actions as Moses delivers the Hebrews. Because so far in the story, God hasn't played any role, so his appearance to Moses just feels forced. In the scriptures, particularly the Quran, God plays a huge role from the start of the story. He inspires Moses' mother to cast her son into the Nile. God guides the casket to the Pharaoh's house, where it's picked up by the only monotheistic member of the royal family. God then reunites Moses with his mother through his infancy and makes him the exception to the Pharaoh's wrath. Other monotheistic characters throughout the story help Moses and his family for the sake of God, and they end up meeting their end due to the Pharaoh finding out what they have done. And who just happens to help Moses in the land of Midian? Yes, another lover of God. So when God gives Moses the revelation, we're like,
oh yes, and about time too.
but in the movie, we're just like, the only thing that we've got which makes us expect this outcome is Anne Miriam. Literally the movie's MVP. And speaking of useful characters, why? Just why? My man Aaron is so good in the OG story. God also speaks to Aaron and he goes out to the desert and meets Moses there, and he's like the plan maker and Moses' spokesman to the Pharaoh because he's just like got a silver tongue. I mean, the two bros are like two peas in a pod. They're inseparable until they had to be for the sake of keeping their people together in the Mount of Sinai. But in the movie, he's such a wimp. He's a cynical, non-believing worm that only thinks about himself. And even in this scene, which is meant to be his redemption, I mean, walking out to the sea was his only way to get away from the Egyptians. So it's not so much of a redemption act, more than like, I want to save myself. It just makes me sad to see God and two prophets being stepped on so badly. And I'm not going to sit down here and say that this was intentional by any means, but I stand by my point in saying that any fictionalization of deeply religious historical events makes the production team responsible for any backlash that it may cause. And at the end of the movie, I felt bad for Ramses. I mean, he was the only character who's still relatable by the end. The pressure of the high expectations that were dumped on him as a child for just being the oldest, and then Moses messing everything up, and he gets blamed for everything because, oh, he's going to be the next pharaoh, and so everything has to be on his shoulders. I mean, any person would hold resentment to the person that would put them through that suffering. But not Ramses. No, he still loved his brother Moses and enjoyed his company. And when it came to Moses leaving Egypt, he didn't want to see him go. He did everything in his power to try and keep him there and rectify everything by literally using his power. But still, Moses left him. And after 10 years, Moses comes back to Egypt and he completely forgets the fact that his brother abandoned him for 10 years. He opens his hands lovingly and forgets everything. And then Moses asks him to let all the slaves go free. Now, if we look at that from Ramses' perspective, that is a hard ask. His father came to power by building Egypt on the back of slaves. And he thinks that that's how to do it. He doesn't know any better, right? His father is the only person he's seen in this role growing up. So, of course, he's not going to say yes straight away. But it's not like he was given an opportunity to see any form of alternatives. But no, that refusal was enough to put God in a rage, which literally destroys Egypt and kills his son. Like, talk about a disproportionate response. Just saying. It wasn't until Ramses' son dies that he truly becomes a villain and seeks revenge on Moses and all the Hebrews. And who'd blame him, really? Your brother betrays you, destroys your home, and then kills your son. And in the movie, Moses knew too, and kinda agreed with his brother. So, how far off is this from the actual scriptures?
Way off.
See, there is no indication in the 10 years that Moses is gone that there was any change in leadership. Like, we don't know that before Moses leaving, Seti the first was the pharaoh, and then when he comes back, it was Ramses the second. Which means that the pharaoh that tried to kill Moses as a kid and killed all the other Hebrew babies is the same one that Moses was confronting when he came back to Egypt. And to add to that, the Pharaoh's greatest sins in the scripture is his arrogance, because he believed that he had the right to own all of his civilians, not just the slaves, because he believed he was God. And we can see some of the mistreatment of the Egyptians in the scriptures when he tortures and kills his wife that raised Moses, for example, or when he tortured and killed the magicians who couldn't beat Moses' staff. And so God was not only delivering the Jews, but also saving the Egyptians from the tyranny they were living in. Consequently, not only does the Pharaoh have to go, but the entire system of oppression which exists, which includes all the Egyptians complicit with the Pharaoh's actions. Now, yes, the Bible and the Quran do differ on how these points play out and what exactly happens to the Pharaoh and his people, but the general gist is the same, and definitely different from the outcome of the movie. So, at the end, yes, I agree this movie is purely a piece of fiction, and the only use of the Bible is for plot points. But because it uses real characters with a high level of integrity for many people around the world, it is also unintentionally insulting. Look, think about it this way. It's just wrong on so many levels to put good people in bad people's shoes. But here, it's not even a human that's a villain. It's God. Many people see God as the objective truth, the all-powerful bringer of justice, and the bringer of eternal mercy and grace. People rely on God for hope, peace, and their definition of good. Villainizing God destroys the objective good and objective truth for so many people, and at the same time, hope and faith. And the movie's conscious of this, and so they try to balance out the paradigm that they've made with
though hope is frail, it's hard to kill. It's hard to kill.
the scores of The Prince of Egypt are fabulous and 100% the redeeming feature of this film. But it could have been evaded with a little better storytelling and sticking closer to the source material, particularly the characters of Moses and Aaron from the first half of Exodus, because only the first half of Exodus is shown in this film. Anyway, I understand why they were attempting to humanize the characters of Moses and Aaron for us, but their humanization shouldn't be at the expense of their own merits, and consequently villainizing God. I would 100% recommend understanding the written story of Moses and Aaron, peace be upon them, before looking at this movie, as I don't want this movie's characterization to influence your views of these amazing historical people. Fiction will be fiction, and that is fine. But when an adaptation moves so far from the original source material, it opens itself to fair criticism from fans. And I'm definitely a fan, and so that's my 2 cents on the subject. If you're at all interested in getting a historical review of the story of Moses in the Bible versus that of the Quran, make sure to smash that like button. When this video gets 300 likes, I shall comply. And if you're in the mood to watch the original movie yourself, please make sure to use a streaming platform that doesn't support the violation of human rights or spread negativity to the world. Share this with anyone you think will be keen for this content, and if you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar content and hit the notification bell so you don't miss next week's drop. Be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.